on this episode of Rebel Spirit Radio.
We start to question what is material success? What is a win in this world? Is it to have a family? Is it to make money? Is it to travel? Is it just to have fun, as much fun as you can? Is that and so when you start to ask these questions, like what is the goal? What do I want? And when you mix that with some tragedy, like in my own personal example, I had the loss of my father at a young age. And so when you mix what is a material win with, oh, wait a second, you could also die. It could also be game over in a moment, not just for him, but for me, but for everybody else. Then we start to put a end point on this line, on this timeline. And we realize, oh, I get it. There's a timeline. What are we supposed to accomplish while I'm here? Or is there nothing to accomplish? Do I just flap around for a while like a fish that's out of the water, just flapping around trying to have some fun? And so when those questions arise, it makes you sort of check your, internal GPS of who you want to be, where you want to go, what is a win.
Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode I am joined by Ray Raghunath Cappo, co-founder of the 1980s hardcore punk band Youths of Tomorrow and the more recent band Shelter, to discuss his memoir, From Punk to Monk. Ray discusses what led him from New York's punk scene to India and over 6 years living in ashrams, as well as sharing some of the philosophy and spiritual lessons from his own experiences in the Vedic traditions of India. Also, please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to or view podcasts. Your support is truly appreciated. As a teen in the 80s, Ray Raghunath Cappo founded the hardcore punk band Youth of Today, which championed the principles of clean living, vegetarianism, and self-control. After experiencing a spiritual awakening in India, he formed a new band, Shelter, devoted to spreading a message of hope through spiritual connection. Ray currently leads yoga retreats, trainings, and kirtans at his Super Soul Farmed Retreat Center in upstate New York, as well as annual pilgrimages to India. He is the co-founder and co-host of Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast that has been ranked #1 on Apple for podcasts about spirituality. He joins me today to discuss his memoir, From Punk to Monk. Ray, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Thank you. Honored to be on the show. When you gave me the description of the podcast, I was like, oh, I can relate to this podcast. This sounds like it could be my podcast. I love what you're about.
Well, thank you. Yeah, my goal is to, at some point, be #1 on Apple. So we'll see how that goes. And I should have asked you this before I hit record. Would you prefer that I refer to you as Ray or Raghunath?
It's like for the last 10 years or so, maybe a little longer, all my yoga students call me Raghunath. But
Mhm.
from the music scene, a lot of people know me as Ray.
Mm,
I go by both, and so
okay.
whatever's easy for you to say. If it's easier to say
Okay.
Ray, I get that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Raghunath, I'm not, it's not a
Yeah, you were
problem for me.
Sanskrit. You studied Sanskrit for a while. Raghunath is a
Yeah.
super common name in India.
Yeah. I still get some of the Sanskrit, some of the pronunciation comes easy, but sometimes it's been so long. It's been so long. I've forgotten all my Devangati. Well, your book, I loved your book. It was a fun read. And I'll be honest with you, the way I tend to do the podcast is I don't typically have a list of questions. I always make it a point to read my guest books because it's like, why wouldn't I if I get to talk to the author? And so what I do in way of preparation is as I read, I will highlight and make notes, and then I go back through and I type everything out. And I didn't have a lot of things highlighted in your book. And I mention that because I think what happened was it was just so absorbing and the
Yeah.
story was so compelling. And so last evening, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't highlight anything. What in the world am I going to talk to this man about? I think there's a lot to talk about. So I know that we don't want to go over every single detail in the book because we want to encourage people to read the book. But you've got this interesting journey where you are in this hardcore punk band in the 80s and you end up living in ashrams in India.
Yeah. It's an interesting story, and it was an interesting phenomenon actually that this was the 80s, the time of corporate rock, corporate
Mm,
music, arena rock.
mm,
And if you liked anything alternative that was different, that wasn't showing up at the Hartford Civic Center or New Haven Coliseum. I grew up in Connecticut, so
yeah,
New Haven Coliseum or when the Staples Center. You liked alternative music, you'd have to go to New York City. You got to find where all the bohemians and freaks and weirdos hung out, and you'd listen to goth music or punk music or hardcore music or rockabilly music. It was stuff that the mainstream media wasn't ready to play yet. And that's what I was attracted to. And I was like one of maybe four kids in my massive high school. And I found like the Lower East Side of New York City attracted fringe people from high schools around New Jersey and Long Island and Queens and Connecticut. And that was sort of like a hub for weirdos and freaks. The beautiful thing about that was that it was open to a lot of other weird alternative things like natural medicine, healing, alternative views on spirituality, vegetarianism, veganism, macrobiotics, stuff that the mainstream lifestyle was just not there yet. There was not many health there was no Whole Foods. Or if there was like one in Texas perhaps. It was a very interesting place to be at an interesting time. It was also the time of where all these alternative musics came together, even though they're sort of very, very different. You had hip hop and break dancing and, the birth of, street art and graffiti. So we were not just in a band, but we were in a very big band that was a leader of a genre, and the genre was straight edge, which was clean living, which was complete antithesis of what the punk scene was, which was like sloth living, any type of drug you can get your hands on, in total intoxicated, sleeping in the park and stuff like that. So we were in the midst of that scene, but we were just into, health and wellness and yoga and alternative diets and stuff like that. And I don't know why we got into that, but there was an influence of Eastern thought. I tell a little bit about the history of it and how it sort of leaked into that world in my book. But for the most part, that Eastern thought grabbed me. And although I was attracted to spirituality and never had really like a very bad experience with, growing up Roman Catholic, I did feel like I was reading a different Bible than
mm,
most fundamentalists were reading. And so for me, it led me to India because I felt it had a very wide, broad gate understanding of spiritual journeys, and that no one particular religion or church has a monopoly on God.
right.
Mm.
Well, isn't that one of the features of the Indian religious traditions is that any kind of expression of the divine is acceptable?
Sure, of course, within certain parameters, but for the most part, yeah, the understanding is God a person, is God an impersonal feature, is God. Do you see God in the trees and the earth, in the planets, in the animals, in the sacred rivers? So yeah, there's an interesting mix, what we would call pantheism,
Mm,
as well as theism,
mm,
and it's an interesting blend, and they work well together
yeah,
in a bigger context. Taken out of context, you develop fundamentalism. You think like my way is right and that way is wrong. But in the bigger context, they would say life is eternal, and we're on a long, long journey here, and we want to upgrade and improve the quality of our life as we grow. That's what growth is about, and that's what human existence is about. It's sort of like we're doing time here to learn lessons. And if you don't learn those lessons, that's okay. Those lessons, we experience this now in our
yeah,
life. If I don't learn a lesson, that lesson's coming back till I get it. And then I can move on and open a different doorway and a different pathway. And sometimes people take head south with their decisions, and it leads them to a very complicated, slippery slope where they can't get out. And it seems
mm,
like they hit rock bottom, they die, or they end up on their knees in a 12-step program or something. But either way, we have to learn a lesson, or else we got to come back and learn those lessons again.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm curious, you were open to these teachings and the band you were in, all of this, like you said, it is crushing the stereotypes of what a punk band would be.
It really was.
And I think you said that your first unofficial guru was Harley Flanagan, who is the leader of the band the Cro-Mags.
Yes.
Um, and I'm curious, though, you were introduced to some of the Vedic teachings. What was it that led you, though, to say, no, I want to leave this behind and I want to go study in India?
Sure. I think it was a combination, a recipe that and I don't think I'm unique to this experience. I think there's a lot of factors why people dive into a spiritual path, and it's not just because I want God. It's more like we start to question what is material success?
Mm.
What is a win in this world? Is it to have a family? Is it to make money? Is it to travel? Is it just to have fun, as much fun as you can? Is that and so when you start to ask these questions, like, what is the goal? What do I want? And when you mix that with, some tragedy, like in my own personal example, I had the loss of my father at a young age. And so when you mix what is a material win with, oh, wait a second, you could also die. It could also be game over in a moment, not just for him, but for me, but for everybody else. Then we start to put a end point on this line, on this timeline, and we realize, oh, I get it. There's a timeline. What are we supposed to accomplish while I'm here? Or is there nothing to accomplish? Do I just flap around for a while like a fish that's out of the water, just flapping around trying to have some fun? And so when those questions arise, it makes you sort of check your, internal GPS of who you want to be, where you want to go, what is a win. And so those were all these things running through my mind. And I was already at that point 22. It doesn't sound very old, but at that point I've already toured all over. I've seen people waste their lives, ruin their lives with drugs and crazy indulgence. I realized I didn't want to go a regular typical route. I wanted to explore some internal ideas that great sages and saints and spiritual personalities, what they spoke of. And that's sort of, I think the combination of the success in the material world and watching my father die, it was a perfect storm for me to start to think like, you got to start digging deeper here than the obvious the choices that are put out right in front of you. And so for me, it was a big one because it was stepping away from all that was familiar. I had a huge community of friends because we were all in the New York City scene together, and they endorsed my choices and they endorsed my music and my band. And I had to say, okay, I'm glad you endorsed that, but I'm going to try something 100% different now. And that was a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. And at that point in my life, I was like, I don't care. This is what I have to do. And so quitting the band was, in one sense, people asked, was it hard? No, it wasn't hard. It was easy because I was so sick of trying to teach something through music. Even though we had a good message, a positive message, I felt like I have to be a student more. I have to be a student before I can teach anybody anything. And I felt like we did change lives. I have a lot of testament to that. People said you saved me from a life of drugs and alcohol. I was an alcoholic and you guys inspired me, or you turned me on to animal rights or vegetarianism or positive thinking. It changed my whole thought process. And although I felt like there are pedestrian things that I could teach that are good and useful and can radically change your life, I felt like I too was not growing, and I needed to feed myself first.
Hmm.
And so it just made me have to cut my situation.
Yeah.
You could probably relate to that. I think a lot of people
Oh,
can relate
yeah.
to that.
Yeah. Well, and there's something I think also generational because we're about the same age.
Okay.
And I remember I reached a point where I also was like, yeah, what I'm doing isn't sufficient and I
Right.
need to escape. And, I quit my job. I sold everything I owned and I left the country for a while. And it was my own particular journey, but it seems something, that was a feature for a while with Gen X. There was something like propelling us,
Right. Right. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. The
Uh,
great generation didn't do that. I don't know if the baby boomers did that, but Gen X,
yeah,
we did it.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think that was another reason why I could relate so much to your book. Um, and it seems like you had a lot of teachers that were coming into your life at various points. I
Mm,
mentioned Harley Flanagan. You had, I think you called him Guru James, but kind of stepped
yeah.
aside from him for a while. And then you met Stephen Rosen, Satya Raja Das.
Yeah.
And what you were saying earlier, he had a question that he asked you about your performing, and it was, are you God or are you serving God?
Yeah. On stage,
Yeah,
are you doing to be God or serve God?
right.
Such a very potent question to ask
Yeah,
yourself. And
yeah,
that statement made me really change the way I did everything to this day. Has it ever had one of those statements that just like,
yeah,
okay, my life will never be the same?
right.
Because it made me realize, like, I get it. I'm doing all this stuff for the ego. I'm
Yeah.
doing everything for the ego from the way, why am I working out? Why am I going to eat? Why am I eating healthy? Am I doing it to like be a better person and serve in this world? Or is it just because I want to look good? I want to look hot. I want people to be attracted to me. How am I relating to my friends, to my students, to my parents? Am I trying to like manipulate them so they appreciate how cool and insightful I am? And when you started like put that statement, am I doing this job, this career, in this relationship to be God or to serve God? It really changes everything. And it's a statement that I continually ask myself. It doesn't end. It
Right.
doesn't it's not like a switch that I flick on. It's like a day-to-day checking in with yourself and checking in with your intentions.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that's crucially important.
Mm,
And I try to ask myself something very similar and put myself into service to spirit and the greater good, rather
yeah,
than,
for sure.
what works for me. So you were exposed to the Vedic teachings, and it seems to me that there was even a little bit that predated all of this. At one point, you were talking about and I loved this, your phrase that you came up for it, transcendental hooky. In junior high, you're going out to this pond and whatnot. And you noted that Walden was one of your favorite books, and that's one of my
Yeah.
favorite books. And
Oh yeah.
I'm sure you know that he had a copy of the Gita with him.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He was
yeah.
he was considered one of the American transcendentalists.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
So I see that as a seed for you.
it definitely was a seed. And that inspiration that he took from the Gita, I felt like I took it upon myself. So I'll just catch everybody up who didn't read the book. The Transcendental Hooky was, my first inklings of spiritual life and our tininess within this world of living beings. I used to skip school and I would just go to this forest pond by my house that I grew up in. And it was like in another world. You felt like you were in a fantasy land. There was like a pristine pond I used to swim in. At that time I used to fish in. But I would just like lay in the grass and think about who cares? Who
Mm,
cares if I live or die? In a moment, 100 years will be gone. 300 years will be gone. Who will remember me in 300 years? Who will remember? There's people that have very significant lives and loves and heartbreaks and betrayals and joys and babies were born and babies died. 500 years ago, those were all happening. I don't remember any of them because they're gone. Who's going to
mm,
remember if I skip school today? And so
mm,
I would use like transcendental thought, the big zoom out to play hooky from school
mm.
and go fishing and sit in the forest and pick blackcaps and wild raspberries and stuff like that. And that was my I think that was spiritual life 101 for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think you were right that doing that, you would probably learn more than you would at going to school. Not to
You
encourage
learn something
people to.
different. You learn something different. You learn
Yeah,
something different for
yeah,
sure.
for sure, for sure. So you ended up going to India, and so you went to India, was it in 88?
88,
Yeah,
88.
yeah. And you stayed for about 6 years?
Well, I stayed in ashrams for 6 years, but my
Okay.
first trip to India, I stayed for 4 months, and then I just committed that I'm going to be in an ashram wherever it was, because I was still trying to
Okay.
figure out, is my calling in America? Is my call? And so I'd go back and forth. So after that, I had moved to a farm,
Mm.
a Krishna conscious farm in central Pennsylvania. And then I just visited different ashrams throughout the next 6.5 years, where I had a particular, whatever my seva was or my mission was, so to speak. And I'd go to India every year regularly. Still go. Now I go twice a
Mm.
year to India. But yeah, I was a monk, a celibate monk for 6.5 years.
Okay. And that's the brahmacharya or brahmacharis?
Brahmacharya,
Yeah.
brahmacharya is the practice.
Right.
Brahmacharis are the people who practice brahmacharya, which is
Right.
celibate studentship. It means you're just here to
Mhm.
serve. You're just
Right.
here for seva, and you're trying to control your senses. You're trying to go to bed early, try to rise very early. You put massive amounts of time per day for meditation, uh, um, selfless service, etc. And you got to understand, India in '88 was like, I mean, if you read the book, you get it, or if you've been there, you get it. Like pre-cell phone, pre-internet, pre-credit
Mm.
cards.
Mm.
I didn't have a credit card in '88. It was like traveling to like another planet.
Mm.
And pre-internet, like, we don't really even appreciate how much the internet influences everything, like
Mm.
fashion, food, conversation. When you would travel, even if you would go to Germany or Italy, it's like they're different places that have
Mm.
different focuses, and they dress different. And what to speak of going to Southeast Asia. So yeah, it was like really traveling to another planet back then, and
Yeah.
it was, you were isolated from everyone. There was, in Vrindavan, the village I went to, there was one phone,
Wow.
and it didn't work well.
Yeah.
You'd have to go, and there was, yeah,
Yeah.
it didn't work well. It cost a lot, and they'd
Yeah.
have to patch you through Delhi, and it was a joke.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have liked to have experienced that. I mean, the first time I went to Nepal was 2001. And even that,
2001, yeah,
yeah, even that was a step into a radically different world. You
radically
know,
different world. Nepal
yeah.
is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They had a little bit of internet, but it was, run by a gerbil and a wheel inside the computer or something.
I know.
But they were still, most people did not have internet access, and
Sure.
it was very, yeah, it was life-changing for me. So the brahmacharya, that's part of the system. I think it's called the ashramana system, where it's the
Yeah.
celibate student, and then eventually you're encouraged to go and become a householder, which is the next step. But
Sure.
I want to kind of, before getting there, um, look at some of the brahmacharya and maybe some of the ideas here, because it's not just being a celibate householder, but you wrote that it was this act of giving up the pleasures of the five senses.
Mm.
And I'm curious, and this is something I personally am always kind of debating, because there is this aspect of spirituality that is transcendental, that is moving away from the world,
Mm.
but we're also embodied beings.
Sure.
And it seems as if there is this, I don't know if it's a tightrope or what it is, that we need to be able to respect the five senses, our sensual selves.
Sure.
And I'm just kind of curious if you could speak to this a little bit more about the sensual aspect of spirituality, and this giving it up, and then
Mm.
uh, maybe I'm faltering. The coffee's still kicking in,
Okay.
but
I
giving
think
a,
I understand your
yeah,
question.
yeah,
We are embodied beings, so what do we do with our
right,
senses then?
right,
And it's a great question. I think what the brahmachari, and I'm not even recommending for people to follow my path, although some
right,
people have a strong calling to it. It's a type of studentship. For example, suppose you and me become yoga students or weightlifting students, where we have a teacher that says, no, you don't lift like that. We have a trainer. He says, you got to lift like this. You got to bend your knees. You got to, this is how your hand position should be. These are all the different exercises we do. And after a particular type of studentship, then you no longer have the trainer, you no longer have the gym, but you have a home gym. But because of that training, it makes the home gym a little bit more refined than if you were just to buy some gym equipment.
okay,
Can you just buy gym equipment and learn on your own? Sure you can. Sure you can. So the brahmachari training is to give you some type of boot camp into controlling the mind and the senses. People can do it without going through that, but there is a time that can be useful. And what I found it was for me was, let's take everything away
Mm.
that you as an American love. What do you love? We love to eat whenever we want. I love the late night snack. I like to stay up late. I like to watch movies. I like to, have beautiful women think I'm cool. Yeah, I like to entertain people, make them laugh at my jokes. I like to buy things, uh, stuff like that. Just obvious material entrapments. I like them all. Let's take them all away. Okay, what do you got? Well, there's nothing to buy because you're just wearing robes. Not even a watch? Maybe we'll get you a junk. You can get a junky watch, a Casio, $10 watch. What about shoes? Yeah, you get one pair of shoes. Okay, what about, our hair? Nope, no hair. Get rid of that hair. And what about like staying up late? Nope, go to bed early, wake up super early. Okay, what about going here and there? Nope, you're going to sit down, you're going to meditate for a few hours a day. After a while, you start to realize that a lot of our pleasure comes in not the pleasure itself, but the hope to enjoy something. I hear my daughter outside riding a motorcycle. And so she went to the motorcycle store yesterday to buy a new helmet. And it's sort of exciting. Hey, I'm going to buy you a new helmet and we're going to go motorcycle riding. And it's not she's actually riding. It's the hope to enjoy that piece of merchandise. It's a hope to enjoy that new motorcycle, etc. So in the Griha or the Grihasta ashram, which is a disciplined householder, there's more license for enjoying the senses. But because you trained yourself to understand, listen, we've created romance here in the material world, and the romance is not what it appears to be. We think it's one thing, but it's romance. It's like a shiny glow of what's actually underneath it. So we learn to puncture the romance of the material world a little better, and trying to find pleasure as a brahmacharya where you have nothing to enjoy anymore. I mean, a lot of people get a lot of pleasure out of just buying things. They go on Amazon, they buy this. People who buy this usually buy these, and then they buy those. There's a lot of pleasure there. When there's nothing to purchase anymore, you start to figure out, well, where am I going to get my fun from? Another thing we would do is fast. How do you get fast? What do you do when you're fasting? When you're fasting, you stop eating. So when you stop eating, you'll notice yourself go into the refrigerator, even though, oh, wait, I can't eat today. I can't eat today. And so you're realizing, okay, I can't eat. I can't do this. Where can I get any pleasure from? Where is it coming from? And then you're left with whatever your tradition is to find that pleasure from a more subtle type, whatever your particular path is offering as a meditational technique. Can I find pleasure from going inside instead of going outside? So so most of us, like I was saying, are not in that monastic order. We have that license to have a family, say, but at the same time, you want to have some type of disciplines. Why? Because the disciplines, very often, by not having discipline, is the reason why you ended up in the ashram in the first place, because you felt like, what kind of life am I living if I'm just whimsical, capricious, and doing whatever the hell I want? Oftentimes, I'm filled with regrets. Why did I do that? Why did I eat that? Why was I with him or her? It didn't give me what I wanted. I felt like I fell into another trapping. So we develop a taste for appreciating discipline, even when, quote, the dog is off the leash, meaning we have our own household. I haven't lived in an ashram for 30 years. And so now I can do it ultimately whatever I want. But I like the disciplines that I learned from the ashram because they protect me from making stupid choices. And I think that's safe to say that anybody who's had any type of rigorous discipline in their life, it sets a high standard. And then you keep that standard almost like as a high bar in your life, whether it's athleticism or, yoga, any type of personal study or martial arts or diet or anything that can either improve your life or maybe destroy your life. I think people who are in a 12-step program, they appreciate discipline. Why? Because without it, their life was a train wreck.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps. It's not like we're
Yeah.
saying no senses whatsoever,
Right.
but we're saying take those senses and use them more for spirit
Mm.
than mundane. Let me just one more example with this. It's not like because we've eaten junk food our whole life, that means we shouldn't eat food anymore. No, we have to refine our desires. We have to perfect our desires. So, with especially this particular practice I do called bhakti, we don't cut ourselves off from a sensual experience, but we use it in a higher sensual experience. I'm sure there's conversations that we can have where we make fun of people or gossip, etc. So that's a sensual experience. I'm making you laugh at somebody else's expense, and we're having some, maybe we're eating some food that's not healthy. We can still have relationships and we can still eat food, but what's the quality of the food and what's the
Mm.
quality of our conversation? So we're taking the senses and engaging them in something higher instead of something more degrading. And you'll hear Buddhists talk about this, or all different traditions. Do I want to degrade the consciousness or do I want to upgrade the consciousness? And we say upgrade in
Right.
all of our activities.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Because, yeah, I think that one of the things I was thinking of as I was trying very poorly to articulate the question was my understanding of bhakti is that it is very sensual in the aspect. You have devotion to the divine. And that shows up in, song and dance and
Yeah.
the imagery and everything. But taking it to that higher level is helps.
That's it.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, what I do, I feel like is more sensual
Mm.
than I've ever done in my
Yeah.
life. And here's this, for example, we just had a big retreat at my retreat center. I run a little retreat center where I live, and we had like 50 people this weekend.
Mm.
And what do? We sang, beautiful call and response chanting. We danced like ecstatically jumped up and down and sang from our hearts and sweated and cried and laughed. We ate incredible. We were surrounded by a beautiful environment in the countryside. It was a total party.
Mm.
And the soul is meant to be enjoyable, but it's not a party that's degraded. And I'm sure maybe not, I'm not sure you, but I can say in my own life, I've been to parties that were degrading,
Mm.
where you sort of like wake up intoxicated on somebody's lawn, sleeping in your own vomit. It's a party also, but it's a different type of party.
Right.
So even with a party, you want to refine your partying. And
Mm.
we have, also we had like beautiful flowers and flower garlands. What is more sensual than a flower,
Right.
you know? And we say even with our partners, have a partner, but be committed to that partner.
Right.
Don't just have hundreds of partners and just treat them as just machines for your enjoyment. Regulate your senses. By regulating your senses, you become more powerful than your senses. Otherwise, your senses, and I think it's safe to say we've all been here too, our senses start to own us.
Mm.
And then we become a slave within the body. Whenever
Right.
people talk about, yeah, I have this newfound, I just accept that I embrace my sensuality. And so generally, this is like a gateway drug for I'm a slave to my senses.
Right.
I'm a slave to my penis. I'm a slave to my tongue. I'm a slave to my belly. I'm a slave to my mind. It's not a freedom. It's a crazy concept of freedom. That's like saying, yeah, I'm driving down the highway. I don't have to follow any rules. I just let go of the wheel and do whatever I want.
Yeah.
No, you fool.
Right.
Hold on to the wheel. Stay in the right lane. If you're in America, stay in the right lane. That's not freedom, letting go of the wheel. That's idiocy.
Yeah.
And the same with our senses and our mind and our thoughts and our sexuality and our finances. No, there needs to be some reins, or else you're going to be in debt, broke, run through so many, men or women, feel depleted, feel empty, have nothing substantial to build a family on or a career on or a home on, to raise children, to set an example for children. It's like, come on, people will do anything except control their mind and senses. They'll make up
Right.
very, deep philosophy to back up their to back up their train wreck.
Right. Well, yeah, and Western culture is a bit of a train wreck because
It is sort of a train wreck. And Eastern culture's on its way there too. They're on the fast train.
yeah, well, and it's, everyone seems to have adopted this whole concept of consumerism. And the
Yeah.
advertising, for example, is always attempting to keep us in a state of unhappiness. Because if we were happy, if that happiness came from within rather than buying something or consuming something, the whole
What would
system
happen to
would
our
fall apart.
economy? What would
Yeah,
happen to our economy?
right, right, right.
We need something new and fresh. And
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
get it.
yeah,
And we are, I think we're at the point of we've eaten so much trash, we're ready to vomit. And I
yeah,
feel like there is some type of split happening in the minds of people. We've lived in the McMansions. We've had the storage containers filled with all types of junk that we pay for that $49 a month so I can keep my VCR and all my videotapes and all these things that are going to be worthless. They're already worthless.
mm,
And now there's a big movement of people who are like, you know what? I used to think living in a car by the river was a weird thing, and now I think it's the coolest thing ever. There's
yeah,
a real move towards simple living,
mm,
high thinking,
mm,
grow your own food. It's come to that now. Things have gotten so when things get bad, when things burn down, beautiful things grow out of that. And
yeah,
we've got to this point where it's intense and the world is polarizing and you have to make a choice.
yeah,
Like, how do I want to raise my family? Who do I want to be? And I see that there is, with all the problems the internet and the information offer, it also offers you a lot of valuable information, but you have to be like a archaeologist and really dig in the right places
yeah,
and search for the gold.
yeah. Yeah. Do you think that Vedic teachings are, and I'm saying that rather than, I could also say the kind of the spiritual traditions of India. Do you see more people sort of exploring that? Because it seems that Buddhism is the one that is most popular. And I appreciate Buddhism and will sometimes refer to myself as a bad Buddhist. I should say secular Buddhist.
That's funny.
But the teachings of, like the Upanishads, those are my favorite spiritual writings.
Yeah, they're
Do you,
powerful.
yeah, do you see these becoming more prevalent in the West?
Well, I've been into it since the 80s.
Right.
And I will say it's blown up exponentially.
Mm,
You'll see resurrections of Ayurvedic medicine, Indian traditional Indian dancing, Indian cooking, Jyotish, which is Vedic astrology, Shilpa Shastra, which is Vedic architecture. It slipped my mind right now, but the feng shui or the
mm,
origins of feng shui are from India as well. Indian martial arts is getting big. Indian body work and Indian marma points, and these are all being excavated. What to
mm.
speak of spiritual practice, meditation, pranayama. I mean, you think 20 years ago, no one was talking about breathing,
All right.
about health. Now it's like, Huberman's talking about breathing, the importance of breathing, and I'm happy. I'm happy
Yeah.
about it. But it's almost like, when I was growing up, it was like the importance of breathing because the Swami taught these breathing techniques and we would just do it. And there was some science behind it, but you just did it because the Swami told you.
Right.
And now we need a scientific data to say, oh, well, we should actually do deep breathing. We should do
Right.
alternative nostril breathing. We should do breath retention. But now they have some science to back up what the yogis, even a simple household yogi who was not a scientist, just knew and just
Yeah.
did instinctually. And now it's like, no, we got to get turmeric. We got to, it's just like stuff that the culture was doing for, millennia. We are just like, the slow kid catching up because, we're just trying, because we only do thing that is science based. They're going to hit a wall with that. The
Yeah.
problem, because there are certain things that you can scientifically base, but the problem is there is also certain things that we can never figure out.
Right.
There's certain things that Vedas teach that you can figure out, you can scientifically prove, but our senses are limited.
Yeah.
And the Vedas also teach about things that you cannot perceive. And that's very interesting. There's things we can't perceive of this world with the gross senses, but you can practice them and they become self-evident by your own practice.
Mm. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Like, for example, there's different sounds that a dog can hear that I can't hear. Those sounds are real, but I can't hear them. Or suppose there's like an ant on my computer and he's trying to understand the universe.
Hmm.
What's he going to know about my backyard garden? What's he going to know about, the city of New York? The city of New York exists. It's functioning. So a little bit, it's reasonably functioning. The city of New York exists. But my aunt, the little aunt on my computer who's sitting 2.5 hours north in upstate New York inside my house, will never have a clue about New York City subway system or the Staten Island ferry or the Statue of Liberty, even though all those things are real.
Hmm.
They are just way beyond his perception. First of all, he can't get there for the most part. And even if he was to get to the Statue of Liberty, the ant can never perceive what it actually looks like.
Hmm.
So that leads us to the next question. What are my limited senses and distance in time and space keeping me from understanding objective reality? I have a subjective ant-like reality of what the world looks like. And I say, trust the science, trust the science. You can't, that's like telling the ant, trust the science. The ant will never have absolute truth. Why? Because he's a subjective tiny beings. He has no eyes. He can't travel. He's limited within his senses. We can't have perfect knowledge with imperfect senses. And so it takes modern physicists to finally get like, yeah, it's a multidimensional universe. We can't understand it with these limited senses. There's a limit to what we can know. But it's steeped in our arrogance. We think, no, I can figure it all out.
Right.
You can't.
Yeah.
You just can't. And you just got to think of yourself like an ant in that regard. That being said, Vedic culture got this. As a matter of fact, they teach that is the entry level to even understanding. The first way we understand is to understand you will never fully understand all of this.
Yeah.
You have to understand that there's a limit. You can understand the absolute truth only by the mercy of the absolute truth, meaning the absolute truth is an interactive force that will respond to your passion to understand it. And that's the magic that happens. And you don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be a physicist. You could be a simple layman or laywoman, and you can still have that strong desire to reciprocate with the absolute truth, and you will get revelation. And from that revelation comes detachment and information how to escape the maze of this world. That doesn't necessarily, you'll meet, I'll tell you a funny analogy. Someone challenged my guru's guru and said, Swamiji, you're a guru. And he sort of nodded his head, yes. He said, then you know everything. And he said, yes. He said, okay, how many names in a New York City phone book? Back when they had phone books. Good question. If you know everything, how many names are in there? And he gave this really beautiful answer. He said, how many drops of water in a mirage? So the idea is that you will know what there is to be known, but you may not know every detail of this temporary world. You can figure out some stuff of this. You could spend your entire life writing theses on a wasp, and try to understand the mating rituals of a wasp and how the wasp gets food and what they kill or who the wasp enemies are and how they build a home. You could just dedicate your life to wasp, and that could fill your tank to the degree, to the most your intelligence could learn. And you still probably wouldn't know everything about the wasp, And so think of all the different facets of this world and the trees and the mountains and the earth and the center of the earth. But you can know who you are in relationship to source and how to escape the illusions of life. That you can know. But we can't go into this world thinking, yeah, I can figure out everything. That is just arrogant illusion.
Yeah. Yeah. What I always tell my students is that we need to learn to surf the waves of uncertainty.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Surf the waves of uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of unfortunate. I know that you're limited on time, and I feel like we're just now starting to get started here.
Well, let's do it again. It's
Yeah,
crazy interview day today for me, but
yeah,
let's
for
do it
sure.
again.
Yeah, no, I'd
And
appreciate that.
I
Um,
appreciate your interest in all this stuff too. It makes
oh
for
yeah.
fun dialogue.
Well, I think that there's often where we are, I think we are starting to turn towards the Indian traditions because I think that not necessarily that they have the answers, but they have a lot to offer. And the place I always begin is with consciousness because in the West, we're like, we don't know. Some people like to say they know, but we don't really know. And, yet you have in this tradition of India where they've been exploring consciousness for thousands of years.
Mm.
And I think that there's something really profound that can be offered there.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's a synthesis between science and religion, and
Yeah.
that's where they meet. It's not just belief.
Right.
It
Right.
is experience. It's
Yeah.
experiential. It's not really faith-based, it's
Right.
experience-based.
Yeah.
And you have to choose to enter the experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Mm.
So again, I know that we are pretty much out of time, but let me ask you real quick, what do you have coming up next? Are you planning on any more books? So you have retreats coming up?
Sure, I am working on some books right now, and I also have, if people ever wanted to do a sacred pilgrimage to India, not like a backpacker, not like a tourist, but like a pilgrim. I
Mm,
take people to holy places in India where we experience, and I lecture in the morning and the evening, and we do lots of kirtan, which is call and
mm,
response chanting. We go to holy places, and it's really a transformational experience. And I'm doing that in India this year, and I'm also doing it in Nepal.
okay.
And then I do a yoga training in India as well in January. So
Okay.
the pilgrimages are in autumn and the trainings are in January in India. But
Okay.
that's all on my website, Raghunath, RAGHUNATH.yoga.
Okay.
And yeah, and just doing a lot of traveling, promoting the book, Monk to Monk. And you can get it anywhere you get books. And it's
Yeah.
even available on Audible for those who don't like to read books. I'm a little I'm a little attention deficit disorder lately in my life, but so I like audio and I travel a lot, so I like audiobooks.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was a good book, and I will
Thank you.
put links to the book in the show notes in the video description, as well as a link to the website so that people can go and find out more information about the pilgrimages that you lead.
Fantastic, my friend. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
Yeah. Well, I do hope that we can speak again because I do feel like we were just starting to get started here. I feel
Let's
like I'm
do it.
starting to wake up a little bit. So,
Let's do it. I'm totally
so
in.
okay, wonderful. Well, I will not hold you any longer. I will let you go. I know you're a busy man, but thank you so much for speaking with me this morning. I really appreciate it.
It was a fun way to start our day, and let's just stay connected, you and me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's do that. All
Okay,
right.
Nick. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
All
Have
right.
a great day.
All right. Thanks. You too. And that's a wrap on episode 149 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you are part of my YouTube audience. If you would like to support my work here on Rebel Spirit Radio, and please support my work, then consider joining my Patreon, which has several perks for members, including early access to episodes, a book club, ad-free episodes, and trust me, I know how annoying ads can be. There's also a private Facebook group you can get access to, as well as the Rebel Spirit Radio Discord server. Now, I'll be honest, there aren't too many other members at the moment, but I'm hoping that will change and we can create a thriving community of rebel spirits. And of course, please share this episode with your friends, your family members, coworkers, and share it on social media. Help me grow my audience. And please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to or view podcasts. You know the grind. But here's the thing, all of this is really important. Right now, putting together this podcast is a labor of love, and I do love it, but it takes a lot of time, especially since I always read my guest books when they have one, so I can have an engaged and informed conversation with them. My understanding is that not every podcaster does this, and my guests have told me that they appreciate that I've taken the time to do my research. I hope you, my audience, appreciates it as well. I'm in the process of making changes to improve the podcast and the YouTube channel. I'd like to create some educational videos. I'm working on two separate projects, one on Stan Groff and the other on Ralph Metzner. It's slow going, but your support will help me speed up the process and ensure that I can continue with the podcast and offer much more content than what I provide now. As I always like to say, I'm here in the Front Range now doing missionary work in regards to religion, spirituality, and ecology, consciousness and psychedelics, the esoteric, and how all of this can help us heal humanity's relationship with the sacred earth. So if you feel moved by the rebel spirit, and I sure hope that you do, then please, by all means, help me in my efforts to share the good news. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to or watching Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nurture your rebel spirit.